Okay, so now that we've imported our data set, we can go ahead and start to visualize our data. Now, I'm also going to show you some shortcuts to make the process of writing your own code much simpler. And the first thing that I'm going to show you is this underscore function. If there's a command that you want to run on all of your variables, you can use underscore all, and this is telling Stata to run the function tab1 on all of your variables. Now, the tab1 function is going to give us essentially the frequencies of all of our variables. So if I run this command on all of our variables, you can see in our results window, we have quite a bit of output. So we have the frequencies for each variable in our list. Okay, if we look at our frequency table for ID, remember ID is just participant number, where we have one ID number for each individual participant. This isn't very informative to us. So we have our ID number, the frequency in our data set. So remember, we only have one participant ID number for each person. So we only have one value. And you can see we have 88 participants in our sample. And each value represents 1.14% of the data set. And then finally, we have our cumulative frequency or a cumulative percentage. And this just adds up to 100% of our data set. So for ID, this really isn't very informative. Again, there's only one value for each participant. This information isn't very necessary for us. So if we right click, we can tell Stata to clear all of the results in this window. We don't want it to muddy up viewing of other output. So let's do this again using a different shortcut. So we're going to run the same exact command, tab1, but this time excluding ID number. So we're going to tell Stata to include all variables from ADD score. Okay, so you can see we have ADD score here through dropout. So again, this is telling Stata to just run this command on all of the variables from ADD score to dropout. Again, this is just a shortcut. If you wanted to, you can write out all of your variable names, but that takes quite a bit of time and also can result in error. Oftentimes I find with Stata, if you come up with an error, it's probably because you misspelled something or forgot a comma somewhere. It happens to me all the time. So if you're coming up with an error and you're starting to get really stressed out or freaked out, just make sure that you typed everything out correctly. Okay, so we can run this command again and take a look at our results window. So now we have a frequency table for both numeric and categorical variables. Our first variable here is ADD like behavior score. And again, this is a numeric variable. Let me make that window a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is a little bit more informative than that ID variable, but still we can't even see the entirety of the data set or the entirety of this variable. But if we just look at each line individually, we can see that a value of 26, a score of 26, was represented once in the sample. And again, that's 1.14% of the entire sample. And same with 29. There's only one person who had a score of 29, 1.14% of the sample, and the cumulative frequency is 2.27. Now, if we wanted to see, or if we wanted to look at the most represented value in this data set, we would want to look at this percent column. And the value that corresponds with the highest percentage is going to be represented most in our data set. So we can see that a value of 50 was represented 9 times, which is 10.23% of our data set. Okay, so remember that the most represented value is considered the mode, and that is one measure of central tendency we're going to talk about today. So let's look at another numeric variable GPA. Okay, so we can see we have tabulation of GPA here. And again, we have the frequency that each value is represented in our data set, the individual percentage, and the cumulative percentage. So if we wanted to determine the percentage of people in this sample who had a GPA of 2.5, we would want to look at this row here. And we can see that 6.82% of this sample had a GPA of 2.5. Now, this cumulative percentage also tells us the percentage of the sample that had this value and lower. So in this data set, 48.86% of participants had a GPA score of 2.5 or lower. Now, if we wanted to know the percentage of the sample that had a GPA of 2.5 or higher, we would actually have to go to the line immediately before. So we'd actually have to look at this GPA line of 2.4, get our cumulative percentage, and subtract that from 100. Okay, so we would find that approximately 57.95% of our sample had a GPA of 2.5 or higher. Now, the reason we can't use this line is because we would actually be excluding these 6 participants. We would be excluding GPA of 2.5 uh, from our overall percentage. So I'm not going to go over all of the numeric variables with this tabulation command, but I do recommend that you look through and make sure you can answer all of those questions with the other variables, such as IQ. So let's move on to some categorical variables in this data set. Let's say we want to know how many males and females there were in this sample. We would want to go to our tabulation or frequency table for gender. And you can see we have the same exact columns. We have males and females represented. And we have 55 males in this sample, which is 62.5%. Right? We have 33 females, and that's 37.5%. We can also see the participants who did not repeat a grade. 76 participants didn't repeat, which is 86.36%, and 12 participants did repeat. One thing you'll notice is that all of our frequency tables add up to 88 participants, which is 100% of the sample. This is really nice because this way we know that we're not missing any data. If any of our totals didn't add up to 88, that would mean that we're missing data in that column.